My name's Robin Hills. I'm an emotional intelligence coach, trainer, and facilitator working with a company called EI for Change. I've spoken at a number of international conferences on emotional intelligence and resilience, and these have been held all over the world. I've spoken in South Africa, in India, in the Middle East, and the US. Indeed, I've even had the pleasure of speaking at Harvard University. We work with change transformation, change at the individual level, the team level, and the organisational level. I'm an authority on resilience and business behaviour. I'm quite fortunate in having two concrete nouns for a name, and these lend themselves to a logo, which I use to try and help people remember who I am. In the gardens of Europe, we have a little bird called the robin. It's the UK's favourite bird. It's a little brown bird with a red breast, and it can be found eating seeds, grubs and worms. And it's quite a solitary bird. It's quite aggressive and it's quite territorial. These are behaviours that the bird has, and I don't share, but I do share its name. It's not a Peter, it's not a Stephen, and it's not a Brian. In the background are two hills. They're not dark satanic mills, they're not vast expansive halls, or they're not even a single solitary hill. And these are some of the polite, repeatable names that I've been called ever since I've had the logo. I showed the logo to my wife and she said, "Robin, you can't show that, it's rude." And I showed it to my father and he said, "Well, that's all very well, Robin, but why have you got a seagull on there?" So it's interesting, isn't it, how people take in information and how they process it. Often it's down to their experience and their environment. When I was working in Saudi Arabia, one of the Arabian bankers said to me, "Why has the little bird got a shepherd's crook?" So again, we're relating our environments to our world, and that determines how we see things. You would think that the company EI for Change would be fairly easy to work with and get right and to understand, but the banks, the tax office, the insurance companies, accountants, indeed even Companies House get the name wrong and refer to it as E14 change. Now, I don't know what E14 change refers to, but in their world, they're used to working with and thinking in numbers, and they're not necessarily that familiar with the idea and concept of emotional intelligence. So I suppose we've got to forgive them that. Let's have a look at resilience. What people see is above the iceberg. It's how you present at work, how you present emotionally. It's your behaviours, it's your actions, it's the decisions that you make. What people do not see and what people are not necessarily aware of is what's underneath the iceberg. These are things that may be private or personal to you unless you choose to share them. And most of the things under this iceberg are things that we all have in common, whether we share them or not. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through each one in turn and talk about why they're important and how they affect us. Now, these are quite random, but life is random, and some of these will become far more pertinent at certain stages in the year or at times than others. And some of them may not be important at all, but they are all things that we will experience. We all go on holidays, and holidays need planning and need arranging, and we need to work around where the holiday is and what we're going to do when we get there. And some of us like beach holidays, some of us like city breaks, some of us like activities, and some of us don't. When we travel, either for personal or for business purposes, often we have to go to the airport or to the train station. We have to park our cars. We have to, if we're going on international travel, get our luggage checked in, we have to go through passport control, we have to go through certain safety checks, and then we have to spend time waiting for the vehicle that's going to transport us to be prepared. And often we spend time in the duty-free shops, kicking our heels, spending time and squirting ourselves with the duty-free perfume. Some of us have children, and children require a lot of attention, particularly around birthday times, but also we have to consider their schooling and their after-school activities, keeping them healthy and happy, and ensuring that they grow up in an environment which is conducive to leading a good life. When we have a new baby, it really focuses us in a completely different way because the baby's needs become of paramount importance, and often that supersedes our own needs. Decoration is something that we do in our houses to keep them looking pristine, neat and tidy. We all have to find somewhere to live, and there are certain considerations that we have to make around finding somewhere to live. First of all, we have to find somewhere, and then we have to finance it either through renting it or through a mortgage. And we have to then look at the upkeep of the house, keep it clean and tidy, which requires hoovering, cleaning, dusting, making sure that we live in a healthy, happy environment. Within that environment, some of us have pets which require exercising, feeding, and if they're not healthy, we have to take them to the vet. When we travel, we don't know whether we're going to get held up or not. There may be an accident, but we all get held up at traffic lights. Most of us are in relationships. We have a partner. Sometimes we go through things like acrimonious divorces, which go on behind the scenes. And then we have to look at splitting up the possessions, splitting the house up. What are we going to do with the children? Things like that. Also, we have parents, elderly parents, which need looking after, and we need to factor those into our day-to-day life. Sometimes they may be ill, sometimes they may be many, many miles away from where we live, and we have to factor in going to see and visit our parents. Most of us have a car, and the car requires cleaning, it requires servicing, it requires MOTs, we need to put petrol in it. Occasionally we have a prang, and we then have to sort out the accident through the insurance companies, and that requires a lot of hassle and a lot of administration behind the scenes. Indeed, I got a new car at the end of last year. It's still intact, thank goodness, but when I got the new car, I realised it didn't have a CD player. So now I've got to look at different ways of listening to music in the car, and that requires certain changes to occur in the way in which I listen to my music. We all require feeding. So what that means is that we have to buy the food, we have to prepare it, we have to eat it, and then we have to clear away after us. Sometimes we have a quick meal, sometimes we have a more involved meal with friends and family. Some of us are on medication, and often we have to go to the doctor to check that the medication that we are on is right for us. We need the medication to keep us fit and healthy and active, and sometimes this medication is needed to keep us alive. And sometimes the medication has side effects. Unfortunately, death occurs at any time. It can come along and hit any of us at any moment, or indeed hit any of our loved ones, family and friends at any moment. We have a certain relationship with God, whoever we perceive him to be. So there's spiritual requirements that we need to consider. I've talked a little bit about health, but we do have to go to the opticians. We have to go to the dentist. Indeed, I'm mildly to moderately deaf, and that means that I wear hearing aids. So that necessitates me going to the hospital, to the audiology clinic, to get my hearing checked. And then I've got the upkeep upkeep of my hearing aids. I need to go and get new batteries. I need to get new bits for the hearing aids, and I have to factor that into my daily work. Many of us are studying. We want to improve ourselves. We want to get further qualifications which require examinations. We have to learn and prepare for those. Washing is a fundamental part of things that we do. We have to wash our clothes, we have to dry them, we have to iron them, and we have to make ourselves presentable at all occasions. We all have concerns over money. Most of us don't have enough, or our spending exceeds our input, and these can cause anxiety and stress at times. Religion comes into play. Muslims have Ramadan, where they fast at certain times between certain phases of the moon. A lot of my clients and a lot of people that I work with are Muslim, and when they're fasting during Ramadan, I have to take into consideration that they can't eat and drink during the day, so that alters their behaviour. There's a requirement for them to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca. They have 2 Eids. I'm looking at the Muslim religion. I'm not Muslim myself. We have in the Christian world Christmas, and that has to be factored in. And our own behaviour alters around Christmas time because we have this frenetic drive to get presents and to get everything ready for one single day where we just have a great gargantuan feast and sit and fester. We also have the internet, we have mobile phones, we have contracts that are required, and the internet is there that drives a lot of our activities these days. And quite a few of us are quite active on social media with various accounts on various social media platforms. And we enjoy seeing what other people are doing and enjoy posting photographs of what we eat and our pets. These are things that people don't see at work. Now, interestingly, none of the things under the iceberg are work-related. One of the things that I'd like to bring to your attention is this overused phrase, work-life balance. I think work-life balance gets in the way in terms of resilience because people are looking at work as being binary to life. What we've got here under the iceberg is effectively life. And we have to integrate that into work. We have to integrate work into life. So the phrase work-life balance is meaningless nonsense. Work isn't at one end of a fulcrum with life at the other. We need to look at balance. We need to balance our lives and integrate work into our lives in an appropriate way. Unfortunately, most of us are at a stage where work takes up a high proportion of our waking life. So let's have a look at resilience. We all are subjected to adverse situations from time to time. Some of these are crises, some of them may be emergencies, some of them are challenging, some of them involve us taking some risk, and all of them will require us to go through changes. These adverse situations may be familiar to us or they may be unfamiliar, but they all drive our life's experiences. How we respond to these situations, these adverse situations, is through self-talk. We have a little voice saying to us, "You can't do that, Robin. Don't be so silly, Robin. Don't take a risk here, Robin. Keep yourself safe, Robin. Don't do that, Robin. Oh, you silly idiot, you shouldn't have done it that way." Our self-talk drives our thoughts and our feelings. Our thoughts and our feelings are there, they're private, but it's our thoughts and our feelings that drive our actions, our behaviours and our decisions. This is what people see. This is what people experience of us, and this is what people interpret around our responses to adverse situations. Now, emotional intelligence is a combination of the way in which we're using our thinking with our feelings in order to make appropriate decisions and build quality relationships. There we are. There's a nice simple definition of emotional intelligence. What is emotional intelligence? Well, in 1990, Jack Mayer and Peter Salovey introduced the concept of emotional intelligence, suggesting that some individuals possess an ability to reason about and use emotions to enhance their thinking, and they do this more effectively than other people. Through their research, they suggested that emotional intelligence is a set of 4 interrelated abilities: the ability to perceive emotions, the ability to use emotions to facilitate thinking and problem solving, the ability to understand emotions both in self and in other people, and the ability to manage emotions. Daniel Goldman published his books in the 1990s. This brought emotional intelligence to the public consciousness. The popular understanding of emotional intelligence came through Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ, which was Daniel Goldman's first book. Goldman identified 5 key elements of emotional intelligence. The first one is motivation, which is looking at how people motivate themselves and how they motivate other people. The inner world component of emotional intelligence looks at self-awareness and self-regulation. Self-awareness is knowing yourself, knowing what your strengths are and what your limitations are. And self-regulation is knowing about emotions, how you're feeling, what your emotions are and how you manage these. The outer world component of emotional intelligence looks at empathy and social skills. Empathy is all about recognizing and understanding other people's emotions, while social skills is about managing relationships through managing emotions of other people. It looks at how you interact and engage with other people on a one-to-one basis in small groups or in large teams. In 1998, Daniel Goldman published a follow-up book, Working with Emotional Intelligence, linking success in business leadership with emotional intelligence, and following on from that, resilience has now become identified as being a fundamental component of being emotionally intelligent. Let's have a look at measuring emotional intelligence. Since the 1990s, there have been many commercial psychometric assessments that have become available based on the various models of emotional intelligence. The ability-based emotional intelligence test is the Mayer-Salovey-Caruso emotional intelligence test, the Mesquite, and this is based on a series of emotion-based problem-solving items which are consistent with the author's claim of emotional intelligence as a type of intelligence and is modelled on ability-based IQ tests. Within the series of questions, people are asked to look at whether they can detect emotions in faces, pictures, various artifacts, etc. Trait-based emotional intelligence tests include the TEIQ, the Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaire, and this refers to an individual's self-perception of their emotional abilities and is investigated within a personality framework. The mixed model tests usually combine trait-based measures with ability-based measures. Now, interestingly, when Daniel Goldman published his books back in the 90s, he suggested that emotional intelligence couldn't be measured. A decade later, with Richard Boyatis, he's developed the Emotional and Social Competency-Based Inventory, the ESCI. This provides a behavioural measure of emotional and social competencies. The Emotional Quotient Inventory, the EQI 2.0, incorporates personality and ability and is the most widely used assessment globally of emotional intelligence. It's considered to be the most scientifically valid and reliable measure based upon independent review. We use the EQI 2.0 as our measure of emotional intelligence because it has some distinct advantages over other emotional intelligence self-assessed measures. Due to it being translated into many languages, it has a variety of norms, and the outputs are available in a variety of different reports, including leadership comparisons, and a coaching report, a group report, and a number of 360 assessments. 360s are useful because they provide very interesting insights from other people's perspectives. Moving on, let's have a look at resilience. And when we're faced with adverse situations, we approach these with resilient expectations. We approach these with a view that we're going to have reasonable outcomes, even in situations with a high risk. We're going to constantly display competence under stress. We're going to recover from trauma, and we can use the adversity for growth. Resilience can be developed, it can be widened, it can be deepened. Now, many assessments of personality have looked at whether they can use part of their assessments to measure resilience. Is there a resilient profile within personality? And certainly some of the assessments are shoehorning in resilience into their assessments. They're looking at the neuroticism scale in the Big Five, and I've seen this with some of the OPQ assessments, where they're looking or suggesting that they can measure resilience. And also some of the stress management measures within psychometrics are purporting to be assessments of resilience. They're not, they're measuring stress management. Back in 2011, Windle et al. From the University of Bangor did some research. They looked at a meta-analysis of a number of different psychometrics, almost 24. They looked at them to see if they could and would measure resilience, and they came to the conclusion that there are some good ones, but there's no gold standard resilient psychometric. There are a few in development, but at the moment there's nothing on the market that really will measure resilience. 360-degree assessments are the best way of looking at how people cope in circumstances and how they use their emotional intelligence, and coaching around contexts which are individual to the individual, looking at their past experiences and how they've coped and how they've managed in the past, are very useful as ways of developing, widening and deepening resilience. Let's have a look at a traditional view of resilience. Resilience is often considered to be the ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. It's often considered that people are resilient if they bounce back. And bouncing back comes from the capability of a strained body to recover its size and shape, to bounce back after being subjected to adversity or stress. This is all very well, but let's have a look at a scale of resilience. Let's have a look at what no resilience means. Let me introduce you to the squonk. Now, some of you of a certain age will recognise this particular individual. This is an illustration of a squonk that's taken from the 1970s album cover from Genesis, Trick of the Tail. There's a song on the album, The Squonk. In actual fact, this picture looks more like a mouse to me. Here is a picture of a squonk. It lives in the hemlock forests of Pennsylvania. The squonk is a mythological creature. It doesn't exist, and the reason it doesn't exist is its survival mechanism when it gets anxious or when it gets stressed is just to cry itself into a pool of bubbles and tears. Not a very good, resilient mechanism for survival or managing stress at all. Before I move on, have a look at the squonk's hairstyle and the colour, and just hold that thought in your mind. What about too much resilience? Well, often within organisations, we find ourselves coaching people who are at the board level or the director level, and they're putting people through change management programs and advocating change. And what happens is that they come to terms with it very quickly, emotionally, and move through the change scenario to a point where they've got it and they move on. They expect everybody to do the same. They don't listen, they don't understand what other people are going through, they lack empathy. I'm sure you can recognise these behaviours. Here's an example of somebody with too much resilience. Oh look, there's that hairstyle again. Could it be that these hairstyles are part of a measure of resilience? Well, it's as good as anything else out there. And the reason being is because resilience is a metaphor taken from material science, and it's applied to human behaviour. Resilience has been known as a fundamental property of materials for many, many decades, nay, even centuries. And in the last 15 years, it's now been applied to human behaviour. Can it be measured in the same way? Well, let me take you back to your science lessons at school when you were putting weights on bits of elastic or springs, and you were measuring the way in which the spring or the bit of elastic deformed. You were actually looking at measuring stress over strain to find out what is the modulus of resilience, Young's modulus. And by so doing, it gave you a measure of that material's resilience. Resilience can't really be measured in the same way within humans, because if you have a look at stress over strain, up to a certain point, once you take away the force from the material, it returns to its normal shape. And there is nothing to indicate that that particular piece of material has undergone any stress or any strain. Anything beyond the yield strength, you get strain hardening and you get necking occurring. And then if you carry on adding force to the piece of material, it will ultimately fracture and break. Occupational psychology works up to and just slightly beyond the yield strength. Anything beyond that point, it moves into the field of clinical psychology. So resilience, as defined by material science, advocates that once the stress or strain is removed, the material returns to its unstressed state. It bounces back without any indication that it's been subjected to any stress. This doesn't happen within humans. We actually learn and grow through adverse situations, develop and become more resilient. Recent publications by Professor Nassim Taleb, who is Professor of Risk Engineering, has introduced the concept of anti-fragility. And this goes one step further. Anti-fragility suggests that certain systems, which are often seen in computing and in engineering, can actually get better when they're subjected to stress and strain. In other words, they're able to adjust to changing circumstances and so can become more adapted to their environment. As human beings, we evolve and improve ourselves by learning from our accidents and mistakes and adverse situations, and in this way, we develop our resilience. Like anti-fragile systems, we are able to self-adjust to dynamically changing circumstances and environments, and we're able to organise ourselves in a proactive way so that we can actually work out what the best strategies are to become more sustainable, to achieve a higher performance and to be more energy efficient. The metaphor of being anti-fragile is actually likely to become increasingly recognised as being more relevant than resilience over the coming years. However, I think the word resilience is so ingrained in the vernacular, we'll have a hard job getting rid of it. It's just a case of understanding and working with resilience in a different way. So resilience relates critically to how we engage with the environment, how we use our emotional intelligence. As you can't control your environment, resilience is about finding meaning in your environment and using your core values to interpret and shape events. The environment leads us to react by using our self-awareness and by using our emotions and the way in which we're managing and expressing our emotions to give us a response to adversity and stress. It drives our behaviours. Our behaviours influence and shape our environment in the way in which we empathise with other people and the way in which we use our social skills. And in the middle, somewhere sits resilience. So let me give you a proper working definition of resilience. If you have good levels of resilience, you possess 3 defining characteristics. An ability to accept a harsh reality. You take an objective view of the situation without subjective views and without denial or without emotion. You have the ability to find meaning in adversity, to build bridges from an ordeal in the present to a fuller, better future. This is where people refer to faith as giving them something which helps them with their resilience. Can you measure that? Or is it something like a Myers-Briggs assessment where you're actually measuring a clarity of preference rather than an actual defined measure? If you have good levels of resilience, you also possess an ability to continually improvise, to put resources to unfamiliar uses and to imagine possibilities that others just don't see. It's a level of creativity. Again, that could be something that could be measured, but is that often looked at in terms of resilience? If you have a look at this definition of resilience, you'll see it works in any kind of situation. People who've had some real life-changing event which has caused them to carry on and to move on. And it will work in situations such as somebody losing a limb in an industrial accident. These types of individuals don't bounce back, but they have a certain level which is, in actual fact, resilience. Now, I've said that coaching is probably one of the best ways of working with resilience, and we've done a level of research by going into organisations and talking to individuals about resilience, what it is and what it means for them, and ways in which we can look at resilience. What does resilience look like? And on the basis of our research, we've put together a series of images which we use as a coaching toolbox. Now, this is available commercially from a company called RSVP Design. They're an experiential learning company that are globally operating. We have found that through our research, by looking at images and helping people to discuss and talk about metaphors, this is the best way in which we can work with people to help to develop them, to build up coping mechanisms, and indeed to develop and build their resilience. And by working with metaphors, we're working with figures of speech that describes the subject by comparing it and describing it in terms of something else. It can represent an experience much more fully than something abstract. And so in actual fact, it enables much more effective and efficient communication. Metaphors condense information, making things much more tangible and easier to work with. And often with a metaphor, it describes an experience in a similar way to the experience that it represents. You can see the card here, which is looking at toys which have some internal mechanism which allows it to right itself, which fits in with the traditional view of bouncing back. We also have other images. We have a trophy in the middle of a maze, or a pirate ship going across the sea with icebergs and sharks, but it's making its way towards a treasure island. We've got people playing basketball in wheelchairs. We've got people in a race who are being held back by bits of elastic rope. We have an image of a knight fighting a dragon. We have images of people being bullied. We have images at work being stressed by telephones, computers, and time pressures. So all of these represent images which are very useful to support people through coaching in terms of working with their levels of resilience. Let me leave you with one final thought: the paradox of resilience. At our worst times, we can become our best. Resilience is forged through adversity, not despite it. As I've said, I'm the author of The Authority Guide to Emotional Resilience in Business, And at the end of last year, the Authority Guide to Behaviour in Business was published. The Authority Guides are pocket-sized books offering highly practical and accessible guidance on business matters. They're aimed at the busy business professional and business owner, and each book in the series has been written to provide information in a very readable, bite-sized manner. The books are available from Amazon. They're also available at a discounted price from our website. We also have a number of courses available, and you can go to courses.eiforchange.info. We have a number of courses available on resilience and stress management. We have a number of courses on emotional intelligence. And if you use the code HRUSERS, it will give you a 25% discount off any course up until the end of March. And finally, here are my contact details. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me through the website or directly using my email address, which is robin@eiforchange.com. My sincere apologies to those of you who sat in on the live webinar. We had some real issues in terms of working with the slides and the webinar software. We couldn't get them to communicate particularly well together. It was a really interesting test of our emotional intelligence and our resilience.